13. Going to the fair. Each June, in order to promote the further rise of information processing, the computer industry puts on a fair, called the National Computer Conference, and known, of course, as the NCC. This year it would run in New York City for 3 days. The Eclipse Group was going there for one in their very own bus. Alsing had made all the arrangements through Carl Carmen, good old Alsing. At roughly 6 in the morning, hardy boys and microkids drove in one by one to the parking lot behind Building 14A/B. The sun was up, the day already warm, and for once they did not go inside. Instead, they milled around the door of their bus. They were washed and combed and dressed for town, and the smell of after-shaving lotion hung in the air. Rayzala and Ken Holberger, however, after shuffling around with the crowd for a moment, slipped away. They went straight to the lab and gathered around Gollum. "It ran EMORT for 7 hours last night," said Rayzala. "Pretty good." It looked as though they might take up debugging stations. In a moment, though, one of the microkids stuck his head through the doorway and said, "Hey, the bus is leaving." Rayzala wrote, "Do not disturb" on 2 sheets of paper and placed them on Coke's and Gollum's consoles. He hurried from the lab. Swift partings often are best. Several didn't make the trip. Rayzala tried to talk West into coming. Holberger told West he could wear a disguise and that way have a good time without any of the team knowing it. West refused. He sent along some of the refreshments through Alsing with instructions not to say where they came from. In an hour or so, West would be in his office, planning for the coming meeting of the product board, surrounded by complete silence for a change. Most of those wearing jackets and ties took seats in the front 2/3 of the bus, while those in shirt sleeves occupied the back. Sudden bursts of laughter from the back of the coach, followed by short, mysterious silences. Alsing swaying up the aisle, dispensing from a box full of soft drinks and donuts. Holberger and Jim gyre in a technical dispute about stereo equipment. Steve Wallach holding forth on the subject of industrial recruiters, predicting there'd be headhunters roaming the floors of the conference, in search of young engineers, whom they'd take back to hospitality suites, ply with liquor and caviar, and talk into defecting to other computer companies. The bus driver calling out over his shoulder, "Keep it down back there," and his injunction being answered by a roar of laughter from the rear of the bus. It took you back. Doesn't everyone remember awaking to the realization that there would be no school today, that an entire summer lay ahead, that the class was going on a trip? Is there anything more gorgeous than a holiday outing in June? In no time at all, it seemed, the bus had achieved Manhattan. Rayzala glanced out the window at his hometown without expression. Wallach, who, like Rayzala, had grown up in Brooklyn, spoke with the air of a proprietor of local history about vanished Ebbets Field and the old Brooklyn Dodgers. Bob Beauchamp, who had seen New York City only once, on a trip with his high school class from Missouri, gazed out his window all the way down from Harlem to the New York Coliseum. Computers and the hosts of equipment that attend them filled 4 spacious floors. The crowd was thick and wearing badges. One badge went by that read, Applications Analyst. Was this someone who tried to figure out what to do with all this stuff? "Hey, check this out over here," said Beauchamp. "There's bubble memory over here," said John Blau. One knot of microkids and hardy boys headed off across the first floor. Rayzala, Alsing, Holberger, and Wallach went searching for DEC's booth. When they found it, they went right to the VAX 11/780 that was on display. They knelt down. Wallach had just opened up the door of smoked plexiglass behind which stood the boards of the CPU when a saleswoman from DEC came over and peered at their badges. "Data General Engineer," she made a face and shooed them away. Laughing, they went over to Data General's turf. It was at one of these fairs, 11 years before, that Data General had launched itself upon the industry, raising its placard higher than any other company's. This had apparently become a tradition, for Data General's sign was once again this year the tallest in the hall, taller even than IBM's. Raised, indeed, to such a height that it threatened to become unnoticeable. Maybe its altitude was a function of increasing competition. If so, and the trend continued, someday Data General would have to set up its booth outdoors. The company always brought something catchy to the fair. One year, Wallach remembered, Data General was introducing a microprocessor, a computer on a chip, so they hired a belly dancer who plied her trade at the company's booth with the chip lodged in her navel. This year, Dr. Gideon Ariel, a practitioner of sports medicine, was the featured attraction. Dr. Ariel had devised techniques for using a computer to improve the performance of athletes and was working with members of past Olympic teams. Data General had given him an Eclipse, an inspired act of largesse, which had gotten Data General a nice mention on NBC's Today show. At the moment, a TV screen was playing back that bit of television footage. "Yeah, sure," whispered Alsing. "We gave him an Eclipse with only 2K of memory and no peripherals." A computer thus equipped would be quite useless. That was the joke. It probably wasn't true, but the other engineers grinned. An old-timer, Alsing liked to think of Data General putting something over on national TV. Dr. Ariel was up on the stage now, in sneakers and perspiring, demonstrating how his Data General system could capture in detail, in pictures of a stick-like body, a jogger's movements. He was offering vivid, computerized proof that the best way to jog is on the balls of your feet. The engineers turned away. "Oh," said Alsing, "there's my machine." He went over to the C/150, a recent model of Eclipse. It was the one for which he had written some of the microcode last summer on his micro porch. He played with some of the switches on the front of the machine. Hulberger and Rayzala, meantime, wandered over to the M/600. This was their last machine. Rayzala took up a position beside the cabinet that contained the CPU, leaning against it with his arm draped over the top. He wore a faint smile. He looked as cool as a hot rodder at the wheel with his arm around the obligatory girlfriend. Alsing approached. "Say, I'm a customer, and there's something I don't understand about this computer. What's this switch for?" "It works," replied Hulberger, "but it's not useful for anything." The community of Eagle became, for the day, unglued. I looked around and none of them were in sight except for Wallach, but he was the right companion in this spot. A grinning fellow approached, offering his hand to Wallach. For a moment I entertained the hope that this was a headhunter about to bestow hospitality upon us. But he was just the chief engineer of another minicomputer company. He and Wallach chatted for a while, and as the man was walking away, Wallach told me, too loudly for comfort, "They've got a 32-bit computer, a 1963 design." You could have sensed that Wallach knew computers just from the way he carried himself. Approaching a display, he looked as though he were sniffing the air. A snort signified a kludge, a shrug good but ordinary work, a judicious nod, rarely bestowed, that here at last was evidence that some people knew what they were doing. IBM required a lingering inspection. You realized first of all that IBM's large and many-sided booth was not made of ersatz materials but real oak. "You'll notice," Wallach added, "they have just the right number of black people, women too." IBM seemed to be making no attempt at flashiness. They had no catchy display, just men and women in white shirts describing the machines on exhibit. These computers were mainly members of IBM's new 430 line, which the company had announced not many months before. In fact, at the moment, IBM didn't have to talk people into buying this new kind of machine. IBM's problem just then was how to produce enough of these computers to meet the orders rolling in. At the moment, an estimated 3 years' worth of back orders had piled up, a piece of good luck for the many companies that, like pilot fish, follow IBM around, the so-called plug-compatible manufacturers, which produce processors and various other equipment that can be hooked up without modification to computing systems built mainly around IBM computers. In some sense, all companies in the computer industry are orchids on IBM's tree. Everyone has to consider IBM's pricing and strive for compatibility with IBM equipment. It seemed curious, a company suffering from too much demand. Not that in the long run IBM was going to suffer more than discomfort from this backlog, but the collapse of many small, promising computer companies had begun with a similar problem. They'd announce a new product, and then for one reason or another they wouldn't be able to produce it in sufficient quantities to meet their obligations. They'd asphyxiate on their own success. But a small company had to court disaster. It had to grow like a weed just to survive. From IBM, Wallach led me to some of its traditional competitors. First, to Sperry Univac, the descendant of the first real computer company, which might have become the IBM of the industry had it not blown its early lead. Sperry had a big new machine and a slide show all about it. Burroughs had erected a small theater, with chairs set up to face a rank of computers in big white cases that looked like nothing so much as dishwashers and refrigerators. A recording of trumpets playing fanfares ushered you into this homely spectacle. The main thing memorable at National Cash Register was the pair of golden-haired women, identical twins, posing at its booth. "The bipolar blondes," said John Blau when we ran into him later. It was a fairly witty remark, drawn from the language of semiconductor technology, but one of those that loses flavor during the time it takes to explain it. Wallach took a look at all the 32-bit superminis at the fair, the machines with which Eagle, if it ever got out the door, would presumably compete. These machines were hot items now. Some estimates had it that total sales and back orders for DECS VAX were approaching 1,000, which would translate into something like $500 million in revenue, just for that one new machine. A certain broad division between companies was apparent. The established and successful, with many wares to show, had sectioned off pieces of the central floors, setting up theaters and playhouses. The smaller, newer, less diversified had small booths along the walls. They were the little jewelry and camera stores west of Broadway. Wallach gave them a window shopper's tour. Many of these little outfits were selling pin-compatible memories, ones that could be added to DECS and Data General's machines more cheaply than the extra boards offered by the big manufacturers. "We're suing some of these guys," said Wallach. We glanced at many systems for producing graphics, one of the latest segments of the industry to experience a boom. You can draw pictures with these machines. Some of the most popular programs for graphics systems created charts of the type dear to executives with ambitious plans they want to sell to their bosses. The kind of charts that carve some commodity such as revenues into various parts, as you might divide a pie. Computers were cranking out many sorts of pie charts. Multicolored pie charts that rotated, pie charts in 3 dimensions. We wandered past array processors performing tricks in Fortran, past tape drives, Winchester discs, printers, and consoles in sleek-looking packages, and the latest modems for hooking up computers to telephones. "I notice more Japanese here than in other years," said Wallach. This was a big issue. Already the Japanese had made substantial inroads into the American market for integrated circuits, and you knew that segment of the industry was worried, because they were clamoring for protective tariffs. Data General, on the other hand, had bought half of a Japanese mini-computer company, no flies on Data General. We wandered on, casting passing glances at trade magazines which were selling advertising and subscriptions, past software houses which specialize in creating those crucial, ever more expensive user programs that had set the stage for Eagle, past systems houses and OEMs peddling turnkey systems, buy from us and you won't have to worry. Just turn the key and your computer system works. A great deal of the overall industry, it seemed, consisted of computer companies taking in each other's wash. Here and there we saw products of the future, such as bubble memory. After a while, however, most of what was on display began to look the same. From every booth came the insistent clamor that here at last was the piece of computing gear that was the fastest, the most reliable, the easiest to use, the most intelligent, simply the greatest in the universe. The spectacle began to overwhelm me. Not so much the variety and versatility of machines themselves, but the volume of gear, the size of the crowd, the sheer number of firms. Wallach said that 2 of the best-named companies were not on hand. Itty-bitty machines, another IBM and Parasitic Engineering. But I saw many other names passing by. Among others, I saw Centronics, Nortronics, Keytronic, Tektronix, and also General Robotics. There were Northern Telecom and Infoton and Centurion, which had a fellow dressed as a Roman soldier standing by its booth. There were Color Graphics and Summographics, Altergo and C-Ito and Ball. "Hey, wait a minute, what's Ball doing here? Aren't they the mason jar people?" "Yeah, but they also make disk drives." Also, the Society for Computer Simulation and Randomex and Edge Technology and Van San, which sold quietizers. There were Datum, Data Pro and Data I/O, Tri-Data, Epic Data, Facet Data, Control Data, Decision Data, Data General, and Data Specialties. And we didn't have time even to glance at the wares of IDEC, PERDEC, MOSTEC, WaveTech, InterDEC, RAMTech, RAMTech. "In '73, said Wallach, "there were 2 floors, and now there are 4 floors, and it's just as crowded." Norbert Weiner coined the term cybernetics in order to describe the study of control and communication in the animal and the machine. In 1947, he wrote that because of the development of the ultra-rapid computing machine, the average human being of mediocre attainments or less might end up having nothing to sell that is worth anyone's money to buy. Although Weiner clearly intended this as a plea for humane control over the development and application of computers, many people who have written about these machines' effects on society have quoted Weiner's statement as though it were a claim of fact, and some, particularly the computer's boosters, have held the remark up to ridicule. See, it hasn't happened. Since Weiner, practically every kind of commentator on modern society, from cartoonists to academic sociologists, has taken a crack at the sociology of computers. A general feeling has held throughout that these machines constitute something special, set apart from all the others that have come before. Maybe it has been a kind of chronocentrism, a conviction that the new machines of your own age must rank as the most stupendous or the scariest ever. But whatever the source, computers have acquired great mystique. Almost every commentator has assured the public that the computer is bringing on a revolution. By the 1970s, it should have been clear that revolution was the wrong word. And it should not have been surprising to anyone that in many cases the technology had served as a prop to the status quo. The enchantment seemed enduring, nevertheless. So did many of the old arguments. Artificial intelligence had always made for the liveliest of debates. Maybe the name itself was preposterous, and its pursuit, in any case, something that people shouldn't undertake. Maybe in promoting the metaphorical relationship between people and machines, cybernetics tended to cheapen and corrupt human perceptions of human intelligence. Or perhaps this science promised to advance the intelligence of people as well as of machines, and to imbue the species with a new, exciting power. Silicon-based life would have a lot of advantages over carbon-based life, a young engineer told me once. He said he believed in a time when the machines would take over. He snapped his fingers and said, "Just like that." He seemed immensely pleased with that thought. To me, though, the prospects for truly intelligent computers looked comfortably dim. To some, the crucial issue was privacy. In theory, computers should be able to manage, more efficiently than people, huge amounts of a society's information. In the 60s, there was proposed a national data bank, which would, theoretically, improve the government's efficiency by allowing agencies to share information. The fact that such a system could be abused did not mean it would be, proponents said. It could be constructed in such a way as to guarantee benign use. Nonsense, said opponents, who managed to block the proposal. No matter what the intent or the safeguards, the existence of such a system would inevitably lead toward the creation of a police state. Claims and counterclaims about the likely effects of computers on work in America had also abounded since Weiner. Would the machines put enormous numbers of people out of work, or would they actually increase levels of employment? By the late 70s, it appeared they had done neither. Well then, maybe computers would eventually take over hateful and dangerous jobs and in general free people from drudgery, as boosters like to say. Some anecdotal evidence suggested, though, that they might be used extensively to increase the reach of top managers crazed for efficiency, and thus would serve as tools to destroy the last vestiges of pleasant, interesting work. Dozens of other points of argument existed. Were computers making nuclear war more or less likely? Had the society's vulnerability to accident and sabotage increased or decreased, now that computers had been woven inextricably into the management of virtually every enterprise in America? Wallach and I retreated from the fair to a cafe some distance from the Coliseum. Sitting there, observing the more familiar chaos of a New York City street, I was struck by how unnoticeable the computer revolution was. You leave a bazaar like the NCC expecting to find that your perceptions of the world outside will have been altered. But there was nothing commensurate in sight, no cyborgs, half machine, half protoplasm, tripping down the street. No armies of unemployed, carrying placards denouncing the computer. No TV cameras watching us. As a rule, you still had to seek out that experience by going to such places as Data General's parking lot. Computers were everywhere, of course. In the cafes beeping cash registers and the microwave oven and the jukebox. In the traffic lights, under the hoods of the honking cars snarled out there on the street. Despite those traffic lights, in the airplanes overhead. But the visible differences somehow seemed insignificant. Computers had become less noticeable as they had become smaller, more reliable, more efficient, and more numerous. Surely this happened by design. Obviously, to sell the devices far and wide, manufacturers had to strive to make them easy to use and wherever possible invisible. Were computers a profound, unseen hand? In The Coming of Post-Industrial Society, Daniel Bell asserted that new machines introduced in the 19th century, such as the railroad train, made larger changes in the lives of individuals than computers have. Tom West liked to say, "Let's talk about bulldozers. Bulldozers have had a hell of a lot bigger effect on people's lives." The latter half of the 20th century, some say, has witnessed an increase in social scale, in the size of organizations, for instance. Computers probably did not create the growth of conglomerates and multinational corporations, but they certainly have abetted it. They make fine tools for the centralization of power, if that's what those who buy them want to do with them. They are handy greed extenders. Computers performing tasks as prosaic as the calculating of payrolls greatly extend the reach of managers in high positions. Managers on top can be in command of such aspects of their businesses to a degree they simply could not be before computers. Obviously, computers have made differences. They have fostered the development of spaceships, as well as a great increase in junk mail. The computer boom has brought the marvelous but expensive diagnostic device known as the CAT scanner, as well as a host of other medical equipment. It has given rise to machines that play good but rather boring chess, and also, on a larger game board, to a proliferation of remote-controlled weapons in the arsenals of nations. Computers have changed ideas about waging war and about pursuing science, too. It is hard to see how contemporary geophysics or meteorology or plasma physics can advance very far without them now. Computers have changed the nature of research in mathematics, though not every mathematician would say it is for the better. And computers have become a part of the ordinary conduct of businesses of all sorts. They really help, in some cases. Not always, though. One student of the field has estimated that about 40% of commercial applications of computers have proved uneconomical, in the sense that the job the computer was bought to perform winds up costing more to do after the computer's arrival than it did before. Most computer companies have boasted that they aren't just selling machines, they're selling productivity. "We're not in competition with each other," said a PR man. "We're in competition with labor." But that clearly isn't always true. Sometimes they're selling paper producers that require new legions of workers to push that paper around. Coming from the fair, it seemed to me that computers have been used in ways that are salutary, in ways that are dangerous, banal, and cruel, and in ways that seem harmless if a little silly. But what fun making them can be. A reporter who had covered the computer industry for years tried to sum up for me the bad feelings he had acquired on his beat. "Everything is quantified," he said. "Whether it's the technology or the way people use it, it has an insidious ability to reduce things to less than human dimensions." Which is it, though, the technology or the way people use it? Who controls this technology? Can it be controlled? Jacques Ellul, throwing up his hands, wrote that technology operates by its own terrible laws, alterable by no human action except complete abandonment of technique. More sensible, I think, Norbert Weiner prophesied that the computer would offer unbounded possibilities for good and for evil. And he advanced, faintly, the hope that the contributors to this new science would nudge it in a humane direction. But he also invoked the fear that its development would fall into the hands of the most irresponsible and venal of our engineers. One of the best surveys of the studies of the effects of computers ends with an appeal to the computer professionals that they exercise virtue and restraint. When the team came trooping back onto the bus, laughing, teasing, their faces glowing in the evening, it became obvious that many of them had not stayed long at the fair. They had gone off instead to see Greenwich Village and Times Square, and they looked refreshed. The conference didn't really fit their interests. "I don't care how computers get sold, I just build 'em," said one of the kids. Alsing remarked, "I don't even know how much an Eclipse M/600 costs." Some in the community of Eagle cheerfully professed ignorance about, and little interest in, the ultimate uses to which the machines they built were put. But they did not hold consistently to that attitude. Some had seen in use machines that they had made, and they confessed that was a thrill. Some didn't hold to the attitude at all. "No, I think about it a lot," Chuck Holland told me. "Initially, when I was starting out, I could have worked for a company that makes machines directly for the military, and for more money. But I'm not gonna design anything that directly bombs someone." Young computer engineers who professed anxieties about the fruits of their labors, those to whom I talked, anyway, usually named as the source of their worry the military applications of computers. One young man told me that if his company should ever start building devices of destruction, he would try to talk the executives into stopping, and if worse came to worst, he would make sure that those devices never worked. No doubt he meant it, but I think he overestimated his power. He worked for another outfit. No member of the Eclipse Group ever talked of sabotage. It would, in any case, have been an idle threat. When the Eagle was done, according to the plan, Data General would ship the blueprints to an OEM, which would build a ruggedized version of the machine. Thus equipped for battle, Eagle would be sold to other OEMs, and they in turn would put it together in packages of military design for sale to the Department of Defense. Not everyone in the group believed that such applications would constitute an unworthy end, while others preferred not to think about that side of the process. What, in any case, could a dissident have done in the situation? Make sure that the plans for Eagle got fouled up and that the machine never came to life. Eagle, as it was planned, would live up to its designation as a general-purpose computer, competent at scientific and commercial chores, as well as military ones. If it did any, it could do all. A dissenter could indeed refuse to do work that might end up in the hands of soldiers. That would mean, in effect, not being a computer engineer. Shortly after he arrived at the company, at a party for newcomers known familiarly as cocktails with the captain, John Blau had asked De Castro if Data General did business with the Republic of South Africa. De Castro replied Blau remembered that the company did not at that time, but that Data General wasn't necessarily guided by politics, which was perhaps an understatement. Blau worried more openly than anyone else in the group about how people used computers, but he felt confused about the subject. A friend asked me what is my social role. Obviously, what I'm doing is in demand, but it's hard for me to pinpoint why. But for every bad use of a computer, I can think of a good one. The computer's reputation for awesome obscurity and the real complexities of the engineer's trade made barriers that were hard to cross. Their wives, some of the team said, and some of the wives agreed, didn't know much about what they did all day. No one understands what we do, said Alsing. These youngsters led, in this respect, monastic lives. What were computers going to do to society? They weren't often asked. A number of the engineers read prodigious amounts of science fiction. Dave Keating, for instance, read 3 or 4 novels of this sort a week. For one, he explained, science fiction has a lot of optimism in it. I mean, we made it that far at least. Part of it, too, we can identify with the technology, and I like the imagination in those books. Several of them, at idle moments, like to conjure up stories of their own. Chuck Holland told me, I do a lot of thinking about what my mind must do. The way I think it's gonna be is that the computer will grow up with the child. When you're born, you'll be given a computer. There'll be this little thing. He grabbed his shoulder to show where it would sit. That goes around with you. You'll teach it how to talk after you learn how. He imagined a teenaged boy teaching his computer how to drive, telling it, okay, now you give it a try, and correcting it when it made a mistake. It's gonna be an extension of me, Holland said. But maybe, he went on, a time would come when the home would be practically a simulator, and the computer would run every aspect of a person's life. Then we get tired of it. We start growing plants or something. Maybe slowly we will turn around and go away from it. If computers take something away from us, we'll take it back. Probably a lot of people will get screwed before that happens. Alsing said, I have a great idea for a science fiction story. What happens when infinite computer memory becomes infinitely cheap? But that was on the ride back, and no one at that moment seemed interested in such speculations. They were having fun. The micro team gave Hulberger an honorary microcoders award, with some reservations, on account of a change he had made in UINSD after they had already taken their unanimous vote. All such awards required unanimous approval, Alsing pointed out. Hulberger accepted with a graceful speech from the back of the bus. Someone asked, hey, where's the Michelob? There was a whole case of it somewhere. We drank it all, someone else confidently and proudly asserted. A little later on, a case of Michelob was handed back from seat to seat, while Alsing stood in the aisle holding forth hilariously on the perils that New York City's massage parlors held for young men from the country. They were free for a little while on a summer's night, comfortable, of course, in the assurance that interesting work awaited them tomorrow, but for the moment unbound from their machine.